Crown of Thorns and Desire. Previous episodes are available on playlist. A link is given in the video description. Episode 3. Disobedient Dog. He should appreciate this tragic beauty rather than be moved to pity and compassion by it. Hadn't he seen through her scheme long ago? She had deliberately tempted him to take the bait, hoping he would give up early, and he could see through her desire for death at this moment. How could he allow her to manipulate him time and again? "Do you want to die?" He teased her hair with the gun's muzzle. "Unfortunately, this time I won't let you have your way." Her ashen eyes reignited with disbelief and rage. "Why? You won't kill me?" He curled his lips into a smile, putting the gun back into the drawer. "You look so pitiful, how could I bring myself to do it?" His hand delved into her black hair, lifting her face, his thumb caressing her rosy lips. He untied the strap bound to the headboard, the other end still tied to her hands, forcing her body to turn towards him like a military dog on a leash. His gaze scrutinized her, and even he found it hard to believe that this woman still held an allure for him. His voice was slightly hoarse. "I'm giving you a chance to live. I want you to warm my bed every night." "No, I am not a prostitute." Her voice was not loud, but it was resolute. He suddenly yanked the strap tethering her, as if teaching a disobedient dog a lesson. She was forced to half kneel. His icy blue eyes were mere inches away. The chill emanating from them seemed capable of freezing a person instantly. "You ungrateful! For the sake of survival, haven't you given up your dignity? I despise hypocritical women the most." "No, I am not a prostitute." She didn't know where her courage came from, but she stood her ground against him. "Humph! Very good." He let out a cold laugh. She could hold her ground and was not afraid of death, much braver than when she first arrived here. This was somewhat interesting. He never compromised with his opponents, but this time he decided to take a step back. "There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Since you don't plan to exchange your body, what do you intend to do?" She could play the piano, dance ballet, and sing, but she didn't want to reduce her skills to mere tools for his pleasure. That was no different from being a prostitute. "I have hands. I can work." "You want to be a maid?" He found it hard to imagine this delicate young lady could do any work, but it was a good way to slowly torment her. "Then let's make you a maid. Since you're a maid, there's no reason for you to stay in my bed." He suddenly yanked her hair, dragging her off the bed and all the way to the door. Her hands were still bound, unable to control her body as he roughly pulled her, her body repeatedly colliding with the hard furniture and door frames, leaving bruises and scratches. He paid no heed to her cries of anguish as he dragged her to the top of the stairs on the second floor. "Abigail, come here." Before his words fell, he seized the strap binding her, forcefully sweeping her up and throwing her down the stairs. The force was so great that she tumbled down step by step, feeling as if the world was spinning. Maid Abigail rushed over and saw her curled up at the bottom of the stairs, her body covered in injuries. The latest wound was from when she rolled down the stairs, her forehead hitting the floor, blood oozing out. From now on, she belongs to you. He stood at the top of the stairs, resembling a king issuing orders to his subjects below. Don't let her be idle. Yes, boss. Abigail replied expressionlessly, bending down to untie the strap binding her. Get up, you stupid Chinese woman. Go to where you belong. Kenyi struggled to get up, her body covered in wounds, unable to tell where it hurt the most. Abigail handed her a set of grey maid's clothes and led her to a small iron door at the end of the basement corner, unlocking the rusty padlock with a key. You'll live here from now on. Abigail pointed to the dark room behind the iron door. Hurry up and tidy yourself up, look at you in that state. In an hour, come to the laundry room. Kenyi crawled inside, a musty smell choking her, making her cough. This was a storage room, large but filled with a chaotic mess of items. Servants. The light was dim because there was only a small window less than a square meter in size, half the height of a regular window. Kenyi fumbled for the light cord, but even when the light was on, it didn't brighten much. She could see thick dust everywhere and cobwebs hung in the corners. She went to the shared bathroom, where there was no hot water for a shower, so she had to use a basin to wash away the dirt repeatedly with cold water, and she simply treated a few bleeding wounds before putting on the work clothes Abigail had given her. The grey outfit and apron, combined with her black eyes and hair, made her look somewhat dull and drab. She had once worn luxurious silk gowns, a purple mink shawl, and seasonal dresses from top boutiques, but none of those compared to the practicality of this plain work uniform. Why are you so late? Abigail stood in the laundry room with her hands on her hips, her tone already impatient. She had somehow brought a pile of dirty clothes. Finish these before dinner, or don't even think about eating. She had only seen the help at home wash clothes, those women gathered in twos and threes, bringing wooden basins and clothes to the water's edge, using soap, washboards, and wooden sticks to scrub repeatedly, chatting as if it were a joyful task. But when she did it, it was a painful and arduous process. She had never washed a decent-sized piece of clothing herself. She scrubbed for a long time, creating a basin of bubbles, but the grease and grime on the clothes didn't budge at all. Abigail brought over another large pile of dirty clothes, and Kenyi looked at the mountain of laundry in front of her, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and worked even harder. By the end of the day, she was exhausted. When she finally finished washing all the clothes, it was already 9 p.m., and Abigail followed through with her punishment of not allowing her to eat dinner. Kenyi endured her hunger and grievances, opened the small iron door, lowered her head, and crawled in like a mouse. She simply had no strength left to tidy up this room. She was very sleepy and tired, wanting to sleep, but there was no bed, only an empty iron bed frame. She saw a broken door panel standing in the corner, wiped it down with a rag, and with great effort, laid the door panel down on the iron frame. This became her new bed. She spread out a thin blanket and a sunken goose feather pillow that Abigail had assigned to her, then collapsed onto the bed. The basement was damp, with a musty smell, but it wasn't too cold. The ceiling was lined with heating pipes, so at least she had a place to stay. She didn't fall asleep immediately. After lying down, the sensations from earlier slowly resurfaced. Her whole body ached, her legs felt as heavy as lead, her empty stomach ached, and the most intimate part of her felt a sharp, knife-like pain. She turned on her side, curling her legs, as if this position could slightly alleviate the pain. In utter helplessness, she let out a bitter smile. At least it meant she was still alive, she comforted herself. Then, she closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep amidst the pain. In her dreams, she was barefoot, desperately running on the cold ground, but she could never escape that black shadow. As the shadow drew closer, she let out a scream. "No! Don't!" Kenyi woke up from this nightmare, a sliver of morning light streaming through the half-open window. She climbed out of bed, maneuvering around the dust-covered clutter, and looked outside. The sky was just beginning to brighten, the earth still shrouded in a dark mist. Outside the window, there was a small pot of flowers, white blossoms and tender green leaves, trembling in the cold wind. Even so, its upright posture was filled with the power of life. But before she could examine the little flowers more closely, Abigail, wearing a nightgown, yawned and kicked open her door. "Get out, you lazy pig! Go wipe the floor in the hall, then help in the kitchen to prepare breakfast." After saying this, she continued yawning and dragged her feet back to her room. She dressed, picked up the heavy water bucket, and knelt on the ground, wiping the wooden floor piece by piece along the seams. The floor wasn't very dirty, and the hygiene in other areas was well maintained because the entire house belonged to him. Besides a few of his aides and drivers, very few outsiders came in. However, she had to clean every nook and cranny, which took her quite some effort. By the time she finished wiping the floor, Abigail and a few other servants had also gotten up, each busy with their own tasks. Loudly. She had been working since 5 in the morning, and now she stood there, her stomach growling, lined up with the other servants, all waiting for the boss to come down for breakfast. On the table adorned with fresh flowers, neatly arranged napkins, and silver cutlery, a sumptuous breakfast awaited. After a long wait, he finally strolled down the stairs, slowly pulled out a chair, and sat down. A male servant unfolded the napkin for him, another turned on the radio and presented him with a newspaper. He leisurely opened the newspaper while sipping his coffee. Kenyi lowered her head, her petite figure was inconspicuous among the many servants. He didn't notice her, didn't say a word to her, not even a glance, but focused on the newspaper and his breakfast. He finished the steak in front of him, casually took the napkin, and elegantly wiped his mouth. Abigail shot her a look, and Kenyi understood it meant she should step forward to clear the plates. Her hands rubbed against her apron, hesitating, but Abigail couldn't wait any longer. She stepped forward, took the empty plate, and harshly handed it to Kenyi. He prepared to leave, surrounded by servants and aides, taking his hat from the coat rack while quietly conversing with Lieutenant Jacob. They were impeccably dressed, striding confidently into the yard, where the stern-faced driver stood at attention beside the open car door. Once the boss was gone, it was time for the servants to eat. Kenyi carried her own iron plate and joined the others in the basement kitchen, sitting at one corner of the wooden dining table. Abigail glared at her with disdain and said, "Who told you to sit here? Stay away from me, you useless pig." Kenyi bit her lip and remained silent, obediently moving to the other side of the table, finding a very small corner to sit down. Everyone gathered around the table and took bread, and only a small piece of burnt bread remained, sitting alone in the center of the plate, clearly unwanted by anyone. Kenyi reached out to take it, stuffing the rock-hard bread into her mouth, biting down with difficulty. They didn't leave her a piece of edible bread. A few male servants ate rudely while whispering and laughing among themselves, their eyes occasionally scanning Kenyi. The women looked at her with a different gaze, but Kenyi didn't care. Because she would rather chew on this dry, hard-to-swallow food with these servants, being the subject of their jokes, enduring their ridicule, than sit beside that devil, enjoying exquisite and lavish meals. Because at this table, she felt like a person, even if she was just a lowly servant, ostracized. At this table, she was merely a part of his fine food. Her bread was quickly finished, yet she still felt hungry, and there was nothing left on the table to eat. It seemed today was destined to be a day of hunger, Enhanyi thought pessimistically. Suddenly, a golden piece of bread appeared before her, accompanied by a pleasant, crisp voice. "By the looks of you, you haven't had enough to eat. My bread is too big for me to finish, so I'll share half with you." Enhanyi followed the rough, muddy hand with dirt under the fingernails to see a boy about 14 or 15 years old. He was not very tall, with a head of flaxen hair and a pair of black eyes that seemed to smile and speak. "Thank you," Enhanyi replied softly, expressing her gratitude with her eyes but not reaching out to take the bread from the boy's hand. The boy showed great interest in her and simply sat down beside her. "What's your name? Are you a new maid? I haven't seen you at mealtimes before, Charles. Have you finished? If you have, hurry up and fix the fence. There's still a lot of work waiting in the flower bed." A sturdy man interrupted the boy. "I'll go right away, Uncle Sean." The boy stuck out his tongue at the uncle and said to Enhanyi, "I have to go work now. Uncle Sean has a bad temper. You should eat it. If you're full, you'll have the strength to work." Enhanyi picked up the half-croissant from the table, swallowed a mouthful of cool water, and took a bite. It was soft and fragrant, made from fine flour, with a hint of milk aroma. After hanging the clothes she had washed the night before in the backyard, she ran into the boy again. He was standing on a high rack, repairing the fence in the flower bed. "Hi, Gianna," he waved at her, greeting her loudly. The boy had somehow found out her name. Strength. What a lively boy! Enhanyi was unconsciously infected by his enthusiasm. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to the fence, looking up at him on the high rack. "Aren't you afraid standing so high?" The boy nimbly jumped down from the rack, his movements very skilled and agile. Coupled with his slender frame, he resembled a lively monkey, startling Enhanyi. "Gianna, what are you doing here? Are you hanging clothes?" He scratched the back of his head. "Thank you for the bread." She didn't know how to repay his kindness and wanted to do something within her means for him. Perhaps due to his work as a gardener, his flaxen hair and clothes were always covered in dirt. Enhanyi felt that this boy named Charles resembled a distant younger brother of hers. Her brother was only 4 years old and always rolling on the ground, and her aunt called him the little dirty pig who rolled through the mud. "From now on, let me help you wash your clothes," Enhanyi smiled at him. She realized that her smile felt a bit stiff, as she hadn't smiled in a long time. Perhaps because of their shared fate, Enhanyi and Charles quickly became familiar with each other. He was a Jewish boy, and she was a yellow-skinned girl lost in a foreign land. In such a special time and circumstance, they met, and soon they talked about everything and became friends. Enhanyi suddenly felt that sometimes God reveals fairness. In this dire situation, she unexpectedly had a friend, and things were not as bad as she had imagined. He seemed to have truly forgotten about her, treating her merely as a maid. If she couldn't perform her duties adequately, she would be reprimanded by Abigail. Sometimes, this cold woman would pick up a broom nearby and beat her mercilessly, but that really wasn't much. Today was the weekend. He held a cup of warm coffee, wearing white pajamas, standing in front of the bedroom's floor-to-ceiling curtains, enjoying this rare leisure. He looked out the window. The sun was nice today, and the backyard was filled with many freshly washed clothes, all hung neatly. A gust of wind blew, and those clean clothes spread their wings like a flock of birds. She was busy hanging clothes until all of them were neatly displayed. Only then did she straighten up, letting out a long breath. She stood in the sunlight, raising her wrist slightly to block some of the sun, bathing in the morning light. Behind the curtains, a pair of ice-blue eyes stared at her for a long time. A slight smile appeared at the corners of his lips. He was an extreme controller, whether in front of the stage or behind it. The rain poured all night, with strong winds, thunder, and lightning. The next morning, the rain gradually stopped. He went downstairs on time for breakfast, clearing a whole plate of roasted sausages in front of him. As if remembering something, the silver fork paused in mid-air. He raised his eyes to look at the row of servants standing beside him, with Abigail at the front. "Are all the servants here today?" "Well," Abigail hesitated. She knew who he was referring to. That yellow-skinned woman was indeed quite ill. She had already checked on her in the basement that morning. It wasn't out of kindness. Abigail was afraid that her dazed appearance would cause some trouble, so she let her rest for a while. "Abigail, I thought you were a loyal servant. When did you learn to deceive?" She is very ill and can't get out of bed." "Very ill? What kind of illness?" "She has been running a fever since last night." He snorted coldly. Of course, she would have a fever after being caught in the rain. "Is it a fever or just laziness? How do you command your subordinates?" "Abigail, you won't be getting paid this month." "Sorry, boss." Abigail didn't dare to lose her temper in front of him. That yellow-skinned woman had indeed caused her to be punished by the general. Abigail angrily went to the basement and yanked her up from the bed. "You lazy pig! What time is it? Still not up? Pretending to be sick here?" Enhanyi was dazed, lying weakly on the bed. She could see that Abigail was very angry, but she didn't understand why she was angry. However, she couldn't think too much about it now. She was running a high fever and had no strength to respond. "Pages. Are you still pretending to be dead?" Abigail's hand was about to slap her face. She knew this woman was indeed sick, but she couldn't swallow her anger. The situation was caused by her, and it would inevitably be vented on her. The young gardener Charles appeared at the basement door. Uncle Sean asked her to help with the flower bed. "You know, there's a big banquet at the mansion in a few days, and we need a lot of potted plants." Abigail's hand stopped. "Fine, better than letting her die here." Looking at her condition, she couldn't do much work anyway. Rather than wasting time here, it was better to pass her off to someone else. This yellow-skinned woman was definitely an ominous figure. Letting her work in the flower bed would mean that if the general asked again, she could wash her hands of it. Charles helped Enhanyi into the flower garden and seated her in a wicker chair. He brought her water and medicine, saying, "Here, take this medicine. You have a fever." "I'm sorry, Charles, I can't help you," she said weakly, almost unable to speak. "No, you don't have to do anything, just rest well." Charles pressed her back into the chair and covered her with an old wool blanket. "Thank you." Enhanyi was immensely grateful for Charles's kindness, but she had nothing to repay him with, only a faint smile as she watched him begin his work. For the past few days, she had been able to stay in the flower garden, ostensibly working, but in reality, recuperating. Under Charles's care, her health gradually improved, and she couldn't help but marvel at her own tenacity. When she felt strong enough to move around, she was reluctant to just sit idly, determined to help him with small tasks. She got up from the wicker chair and walked a few laps around the vast flower garden. Behind the garden was a specially built small greenhouse, housing various potted plants. Although it was winter, many fragrant flowers were still blooming here. She decided to help him by weeding the potted plants in the greenhouse. She squatted down and began to work. Suddenly, her dark eyes brightened as she discovered many small white flowers in little clay pots in the corner of the greenhouse. She suddenly remembered her own home, the pot of small flowers outside the half window of her basement. These flowers could bloom in the sunlight during the day but could not withstand the cold of winter at night, so that pot of flowers must have been placed on the windowsill in the morning and brought back inside at night. It turned out that the person who placed that pot of flowers for her every day was him, Charles. Annie smiled, her heart filled with a tender feeling. It was those pure white flowers that had given her hope for life during her most despairing times. These days had been somewhat difficult, although working all day was tiring. She had learned a lot and gradually adapted to the tasks: how to keep the rooms free of dust, how to sweep out the debris from the floor cracks, how to wash various fabrics and stains, how to make his shoes shine and his uniform neat. Now her task was to clean the study. The tall bookshelves were densely packed with books, some of which had gathered dust since they weren't frequently handled. Abigail ordered her to clean every corner and dust each book. This command was clearly a bit unreasonable, but Abigail gave her a week to specifically do this task, indicating it was not merely to torment her. She started cleaning from the top, standing on a stool to take down all the books from the highest shelf. These were all scripts lying flat. She opened a book with a blue cover. She continued to flip through the book, finding several pages of sheet music at the back. The familiar little notes danced before her eyes, seemingly forming a series of flowing melodies. Unable to resist the temptation, she jumped down from the stool and gently approached the grand piano covered in red velvet. Just a small piece, and without pressing the pedal, the sound shouldn't be too loud, perhaps no one would hear, she thought, somewhat self-deceivingly. He returned home early that day, only to retrieve a document that was confidential and had to be picked up by him personally. As he passed the study, he inadvertently heard the piano music coming from inside. He paused on the stairs, leaning to the side, but after hearing just a small section of the piece, he strode up the stairs. Closer. After gathering what he needed, he quickly descended again but suddenly stopped at the corner, addressing Abigail, who was preparing to go to the basement. "I just noticed a stain on the office floor. Don't you have enough hands? Why not send someone to clean it up?" He could distinguish her piano playing. The sound was robust, certainly not produced by someone weak in body or spirit. Yet Abigail claimed she was ill, which was clearly an excuse. "I'm sorry, General, I'll send someone to clean it right away." Abigail, not catching the implication in his words, crossed her arms and replied somewhat awkwardly. The corner of his eye twitched, and he didn't press further. He quickly passed by Abigail, pushed open the large door, and stepped outside, where a car was waiting for him. He had no time to waste on this foolish woman. In recent days, Enhanyi's mood had lightened because besides waking up every morning to admire that pot of white flowers through the iron bars of the window and smelling its fragrance, she also enjoyed chatting with the little gardener Charles in the flower garden. Another source of joy was cleaning the study and polishing the piano, where she could play a piece spontaneously. Abigail did not stop her from playing. She thought she was hiding it well, that no one heard her secretly playing, but that was not the case. Whenever the piano music started, everyone would pause their work and quietly listen to the flowing notes that poured from the keys. The melody of the piece was melodious. Of course, only the player knew that this was a piano adaptation of a folk tune originally called A Beautiful Jasmine Flower. When she played with enthusiasm, she would even hum softly, "A beautiful jasmine flower, a beautiful jasmine flower, the whole garden fragrant, no one can compare to it. I wish to pick one to wear, but I'm afraid of others' ridicule. A beautiful jasmine flower, a beautiful jasmine flower, the jasmine blooms, snow cannot be whiter than it. I wish to pick one to wear, but I'm afraid the flower watchers will scold me. A beautiful jasmine flower, a beautiful jasmine flower, the whole garden blooms, no one can surpass it. I wish to pick one to wear, but I'm afraid it won't sprout next year." For several consecutive days, if he happened to return home before 10 in the evening, he would hear this tune. That day, he was in an unusually good mood because the commander had clearly indicated that he would soon be promoted to the rank of general. The piano music continued, and he paused outside the study door, not removing his white gloves, gently resting his hand on the door. This piece he had listened to several times over the past few days, each time evoking different emotions, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes bittersweet, sometimes bitter. Today, her playing was so lively, perhaps because he was in a good mood, the notes seemed to bloom like a delicate white flower, and he could almost smell its fresh fragrance. He applied even pressure with his palm and slowly pushed open the heavy wooden door, which felt as if it required great strength to open. Finally, he stepped inside, and what met his icy blue eyes was her back, dressed in a grey work uniform tied with a dust-covered apron. Her black hair was tied in a ponytail, cascading smoothly down her back. Her shoulders were so frail, her neck slender, yet her back was straight, her delicate shoulders gently trembling with her long arms. This old piano belonged to his grandmother. He could play it well, as it was one of the essential subjects from childhood, but he had never realized that a piano could have a soul. Each time her crystalline fingertips touched the keys, the piano seemed to respond to her, returning with clear and enchanting sounds. She was so fragile yet so resilient. If she were a man, she might become a formidable opponent he would have to crush in its infancy. However, she was a woman, and despite his brutality towards her, he had not destroyed her will. What kind of woman was she? She had no particular beliefs or convictions, yet she could be so strong. He was filled with curiosity, unconsciously drawn to her, stepping closer and closer. musicians. Dressed in black, he entered her pure white world, which radiated a soft glow. The light of dusk filtered into the room, and in this hazy, gentle light, he felt very comfortable. Suddenly, he stopped, as if recalling something. He should listen to this piece to the end, he thought silently, not moving forward but closing his eyes, quietly listening to the beautiful piano music. She closed the piano lid and began to pick up a cloth to wipe the piano bench. He suddenly realized that the music had stopped. Instinctively, he quickly stepped back and hid behind the door, peering through the half-open door crack. Inside the study, she continued to hum the tune softly while cleaning the books on the shelves, unaware of the person outside. He turned and walked up the stairs. A grand banquet was about to be held in the mansion to celebrate his promotion. Abigail was busy beyond measure, and although many extra hands had been added to the household, it still wasn't enough. Enhanyi finally understood why Abigail had been so particular about cleanliness lately. "Take this menu to the general's bedroom," Abigail handed her a piece of paper. Enhanyi carefully accepted it, the page densely filled with the evening's dishes. She asked hesitantly, "Do I really have to go?" "What? Do you want me to go? Can't you see I'm busy?" Abigail shot back at her with a glare. "All right," Enhanyi bit her lip and replied softly. She stepped out of the kitchen, leaning against the staircase railing, tightly clutching the menu in her hand. Although these days had been quite peaceful, she blended in with the servants, standing behind his dining table, and sometimes kneeling on the floor to wipe it. Suddenly hearing footsteps, she would lower her head and glance sideways, catching sight of his black military boots passing by on the stairs. Other than that, she had no interaction with him. Now, with Abigail asking her to deliver the menu to his room, was he about to stir up new trouble? But what was meant to come would come. Enhanyi mustered her courage and knocked on the door of his reception room on the second floor. "Come in," his voice came from inside. Enhanyi walked over and saw him bent over, quickly writing something with a fountain pen on a document. Her heart raced, and her voice trembled despite her efforts to control her emotions. "This is the menu for tomorrow's banquet." "Put it on the table," he replied, his ice blue eyes still focused on the paperwork. Enhanyi carefully placed the menu on the corner of the table. "Can I leave now?" He didn't answer her, slightly raised his left hand, and made a gesture with his long fingers, indicating she could go. Enhanyi closed his door, and from the moment she shut it, her heart began to race even more fiercely. She skipped down the stairs, bouncing on the polished floor she had just cleaned, her steps resembling a practiced dance from Swan Lake. She couldn't help but feel relieved. He had completely lost interest in her. He hadn't humiliated her, scolded her, or even looked at her. From start to finish, he had only lowered his head, expressionless, dealing with the documents on the table. He treated her like a maid, an ordinary maid at that. Although Abigail didn't think she was a competent maid, she believed she could do the job well. This made her elated, and she ran straight to the flower garden, too excited to not share her happiness with a friend. Standing high on a ladder, the gardener Charles was puzzled by her excitement and joy. He had always thought of her as a very introverted girl, yet today she had called him down from the ladder to dance with her. Charles didn't know why she was so happy, but seeing her smile made him feel happy too. In the reception room on the second floor, the red floor-to-ceiling curtains blocked out the sunlight outside. He didn't see the young boy and girl dancing in the sunlight, he was just busy handling the documents. Recently, he had been very busy, needing to finish too many tasks before his position changed. After dealing with all the paperwork, he locked several confidential documents in the safe. His ice-blue gaze fell on the white paper at the corner of the table, densely filled with several lines of the menu. He reached out to take it, not looking at the words, but folding the paper into a long strip and then bringing it to his nose to sniff. His golden eyebrows furrowed slightly. It was the smell of potatoes mixed with olive oil from the kitchen. After careful preparation and meticulous planning, the celebration banquet finally commenced. Enhanyi was assigned a brand new black and white maid uniform. Wearing this outfit, she served dishes and poured drinks for the guests. From dusk until the moon rose, she was busy moving around the banquet, where male and female guests gathered in groups, strolling from the front hall to the garden, everywhere filled with the cheerful sound of violin music played by musicians. Jasmine flower. Please pour me a glass of wine. A tall officer wearing glasses raised his empty cup. Enhanyi held the champagne bottle with both hands and filled his glass. He scrutinized her through his glasses. As she filled his drink and was about to retreat to her original position, the man suddenly pulled her into his embrace, examining her closely. Black eyes, black hair, how rare! He kissed her cheek. What a little beauty! Enhanyi struggled to push him away. Her fierce resistance spilled his wine and soaked his military uniform. She knew his rank was not low, anyone attending this banquet would not be a low-ranking officer. She hurriedly found a handkerchief to wipe the wine stains from his jacket. Her handkerchief brushed against the oak leaf-patterned metal on his chest, and his cold gaze shot through the glass lenses at her, as if mocking her ignorance. Philip, my friend, you really came late. His figure appeared on the stairs as he quickly descended. The bespectacled officer smiled and stepped forward to embrace him in greeting. Seizing the opportunity, Enhanyi clutched the wine bottle and stepped aside, realizing their friendship was quite deep. Ryan, I've been here for a while, but you've been surrounded by women, and I couldn't get close to you. He smiled, spreading his arms, wrapping one around the bespectacled officer's broad shoulders, and pointing at his prominent nose. Don't make excuses, heaven knows which woman kicked you out of bed to come to me. The bespectacled officer showed no annoyance at the finger pointed at him and continued, I would have loved to stay in that woman's embrace, but I wanted to see you more, my elegant Atlantis knight in black. He emphasized the last few words. Philip, you're mocking me again. He raised his empty glass toward Enhanyi. Fill it for me and him, darling. I want to toast this sharp-tongued fellow. Enhanyi poured the remaining wine from the bottle into their glasses, and after filling both cups, there was hardly any wine left in the bottle. Congratulations, Ryan. The bespectacled officer raised his glass to him. Thanks to your kind words. He wrapped his arm around the officer's shoulder and raised his glass high. The two men clinked their glasses and drank the fine wine, and she took the chance to escape back to the basement. She closed the door, her heart pounding. After finally calming down a bit, she was startled by the sight before her. The little gardener Charles was in her room. He hadn't turned on the light, and his black eyes sparkled in the darkness, nearly making her scream. Charles, what are you doing here? Didn't I tell you to hide? There are Nazi officers outside. If they see you, they'll throw you into a camp. I slipped in through the back door, Gianna. What's wrong? He had intended to scare her, but seeing her flustered expression made him concerned. She shook her head, calming herself. It's nothing, really. She had just been dealing with 2 wolves. Although she hadn't suffered any losses, she was still shaken. Those Nazi officials looked so well dressed and refined, yet each one was deeply dark inside. I'm just glad you're okay. Actually, I came to tell you that today is my birthday. Happy birthday, Charles. But I don't have any gifts to give you. Enhanyi blurted out without thinking. She truly wanted to give him a gift, but she was utterly broke and had nothing. Charles blinked his long-lashed black eyes. I want you to play a piece for me. Of course. What do you want to hear? Just the one you usually play. You know I play the piano. Enhanyi was a bit startled. She thought she had kept it secret enough. Don't be nervous, Gianna. I heard you through the window. The study is close to the flower garden. You're really a talented girl. Actually, it doesn't matter that you heard me. That was a folk tune, adapted into a piece called Jasmine Flower, Enhanyi said softly. Jasmine Flower, how nice. I love jasmine. I heard Uncle Sean say that next spring, the flower garden will introduce many new flower seeds. I'll ask him to get some jasmine seeds, and then I can see the jasmine bloom and hear you play. His excited tone suddenly turned somber. But because I became the general's gardener, I was spared, while my family was all taken away by them. Enhanyi held his thin shoulder gently, looking at him with warmth, trying to give him support. Charles, you have to be strong. This war will pass, and your family and friends will be found. Until then, you must live well, just like I do. Yet, Gianna, you're really strong. The boy nodded, showing her a smile with his little tiger teeth. Enhanyi's gaze darkened. Actually, I once thought about dying, but it was that little flower you gave me that reignited my hope for life. In this world, we can only survive by helping each other and keeping warm together." Charles nodded, his black eyes suddenly filled with courage. As if making a solemn promise, he said to her word by word, "Gianna, if anyone bullies you, you must tell me. I will avenge you." "You silly boy! You're just a child." Enhanyi's earlier gloom vanished, and she laughed at him. "Don't call me a child, don't you believe me? I'm a man. In the eyes of us Jews, 16 is already adulthood. I can protect you. I believe you." She took his hand. "Come on, let's go to the study. I'll play for you now. They're all in the front yard and garden, so they won't notice us, but I can only play a short piece." "Great." He jumped up, looking more like a monkey. "Work. Alcohol is a good thing, it can make one forget everything." He thought there was something wrong with his ears, for amidst the clamor of the banquet and the sound of instruments, he could hear that familiar melody, as if a light floral scent had wafted by. Since the dinner began, he had already been poured quite a bit of wine, so he couldn't confirm whether his mind was clear. Perhaps this was just his hallucination, as he had been listening to this piece so much these days that his ears were almost calloused. Yet, he still staggered towards the source of the music. When he reached the door of the study and clearly heard the melody coming from behind the tightly shut door, a smirk crept onto his lips, a wicked smile. His golden hair was a bit disheveled, and his body felt unsteady. He leaned one arm against the door panel and tugged at the tie around his neck. Yes, he must be drunk, otherwise, he wouldn't feel so hot all over. If something happened tonight, he wouldn't have to blame himself, it was all because of that alcohol. With that thought, he gently pushed open the door to the study. The smile on his face froze instantly when he saw her at the piano. Beside her sat a boy with flaxen hair, a boy he recognized as the old gardener Sean's little helper. He had only heard Sean say that this child was quite nimble, even though he was a Jew. The boy rested his chin on his hand, intently listening to her play. As she played softly, she smiled sweetly at the boy. He stood a few meters away, but it was the first time he had seen her smile so closely. In an instant, the drunkenness he had been brewing vanished, as if a searing flame was burning within him. Why was her smile so beautiful, so lovely, that it stirred a man's impulse to cherish her? The scene that had just unfolded in the garden left him quite displeased, but that was his old partner, he had tried his best not to hold it against her. She shouldn't be smiling at a boy like that. Anger burned uncontrollably within him, and the alcohol he had swallowed, now mingled with his blood, intensified that fire. But what doused this anger was a chilling fear that surged from deep within him. He suddenly felt an unprecedented fear because he knew he was jealous so starkly, so jealous. Anger itself was not terrifying, nor was jealousy, but what was terrifying was the fact hidden beneath that jealousy. How ridiculous, this must be his illusion. He forced a smile, masking his grimace. His steps were chaotic when he arrived, but they were unusually clear as he left. By midnight, she had washed all the dishes and arranged them neatly. It was already 4 a.m. Exhausted, collapsed onto her bed and immediately fell into a deep sleep. When she opened her eyes, the sun was already high in the sky. She rolled out of bed, opened the small iron door a crack, and glanced at the clock in the center of the basement. Oh my! It was already 9 a.m. She quickly put on her clothes and shoes, set a towel in the basin, and washed her face. She felt that today was somehow different from usual. It was very quiet outside, perhaps the servants were too tired after last night's late work, and no one was up early. Otherwise, how could allow her to sleep in this late? Yet, she still felt that something was off. Kanye subconsciously glanced at the half-open windowsill. The table was empty, with no flowers. Could it be that little monkey had celebrated his birthday last night and was still sleeping in, forgetting to bring her flowers? She needed to tell him that sending flowers to a lady should be a daily commitment, missing even one day was unacceptable. She couldn't forgive him. She tiptoed up the stairs. There was no one in the hall. She stepped out the front door and walked towards the flower bed. From a distance, she saw that the flower bed was quite lively. The servants had gathered in a circle. It turned out everyone was already up, and she was the only one who had slept in. She heard Abigail's voice, sounding unusual, "Stop looking and get back to work." A sudden sense of foreboding surged in Kanye's heart. She quickened her pace to look into the crowd, where Abigail and several maids, the cook, and Uncle Sean were gathered, but he was nowhere to be found. Uncle Sean's strong shoulders looked a bit slumped. Poor child, he fell from the rack. I told him long ago that the rack wasn't stable. Her heart skipped a beat. Finally, she pushed her way into the crowd to see the center of the circle. Gardener. She covered her mouth with her hands. A pain shot through her heart. It was Charles, that little monkey, but he was no longer agile. His frail body lay slumped in a pool of blood, crushed under the fallen wooden rack. His limbs were already stiff, and only his flaxen hair fluttered gently in the breeze. Kanye threw herself onto him, crying out, "How could this happen?" Just last night, he had just celebrated his 16th birthday. How could fate be so cruel? The merciless Grim Reaper swung his black scythe and took away an innocent young life just like that. She cried out in anguish, her voice shaking everyone present. People stopped being silent and shed tears. Everyone, step back. Captain Jacob had arrived at the scene without her noticing. He wore white gloves and checked the dead boy's bloodied and muddy mouth and nose. His gray-green eyes trembled slightly. He died from the fall, it was just an accident. After saying this, he instructed 2 soldiers to move the wooden rack and carry away the body. Everyone, return to work. Captain Jacob's tone was somewhat harsh as he dismissed the servants and glanced at her, who was kneeling on the ground. Kenyi didn't want them to take him away, but she had neither reason nor authority to stop them. She could only kneel on the cold ground, letting her tears freeze in the cold wind. The evening glow of that day was as fiery red as flames. The sunset light streamed into the room through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the study, illuminating the black piano and her frail body. She played the piano, the sound so sorrowful that it brought tears to anyone who heard it. Clack clack, the sound of his military boots echoed on the floor, coming closer. She knew he had arrived, but the sadness enveloped her, making her temporarily forget her fear. She played the piece over and over, using the piano's voice to mourn his departed soul. He stood behind her in a black uniform, seemingly there to appreciate her music. He gently walked to the piano, resting his hand lightly on the piano lid. Her delicate fingers pressed gently on the keys, but the piano responded with such heaviness. She knew his soul must be very light because he was so pure. He gazed at her porcelain-like face from the side, his dark eyes clear as a spring, long eyelashes occasionally fluttering, glistening with tears. She played for him, cried for him, grieved for him, all her emotions stemmed from that insignificant gardener. The music was beautiful, as if it could touch the deepest strings of the heart. His hand gently caressed and moved over the exquisitely lacquered and silver-edged piano lid, causing the entire piano to vibrate, including the lid. Suddenly, he slammed the piano lid down. Bang! Her fingers couldn't withdraw in time, and they were crushed under the heavy piano lid. Each key of the ancient piano resonated with a mournful sound as the lid fell, drowning out her voice. Ah! She let out a piercing scream, her hands immobilized. After a few seconds, the pain surged through her hands, and at the same time, hot tears streamed down from her dark eyes. Her body leaned over the piano, bending forward. It hurt so much. As time passed, the pain rapidly expanded, consuming her consciousness. He slowly lifted the piano lid. Her fingers were already bruised and swollen, quickly filling with blood. Heart and fingers were connected. She looked at her hands but couldn't move them at all, as if those 10 fingers no longer belonged to her. She was almost in so much pain that she couldn't make a sound. Ah! He grasped her hand in his palm, sending another wave of piercing pain through her. He shook his head, squinting his eyes, filled with pity as he said, "You can never play the piano again, these beautiful little hands." Kenyi was in unbearable pain, her tears almost blurring her vision, but she saw the raw madness and jealousy in his eyes, and in that moment, she understood the true reason behind the gardener Charles's death. It was as if the pain in her fingers temporarily receded, replaced by a surge of rage. You killed him? You killed him! What wrong did he commit that warranted his death? Judgment. In the face of her accusation, he did not deny it at all. His ice blue eyes stared directly at her, his gaze like a sharp knife piercing her soul, as if the one guilty of murder was not him, but her. He spoke each word deliberately. Wrong? His wrong was having ears, his wrong was having eyes. A Jew shouldn't have ears or eyes. He simply shouldn't have listened to her play the piano or looked at her smile. His ethnicity had nothing to do with it. He hadn't intended to explain too much, but just this one sentence revealed far too much. He closed his mouth, but his lips still trembled slightly, his gaze shifting in depth, the ice-blue pupils changing focus. A middle-aged female doctor, accompanied by her young assistant, was treating her wounds with a degree of professionalism. The light in the room was too dim, so they had to add a few desk lamps. The doctor injected her with an anesthetic, and she felt no pain. The doctor performed a small, precise surgery on her hands, applied medication, and had the assistant wrap them in gauze. The doctor exhaled, preparing to tidy up her instruments when suddenly she seemed to remember something and said to her young assistant, "Lena, check to see if she has any other injuries." The young assistant examined her body and suddenly stopped moving. "Doctor," her eyes widened as she murmured. Following the assistant's fixed gaze, the doctor looked between Kenyi's legs. Perhaps due to years of medical experience, she remained calmer than the assistant. "Give me a hemostat, and an anesthetic." Kenyi leaned weakly against the bed, motionless, as if she were a thoughtless shell. The next morning, Abigail pushed open the basement door and tossed a box of ointment at her. "Here, apply this to your wounds, it will feel better." Seeing her expressionless face and lack of response, the plump woman's face showed signs of impatience. "You troublesome yellow-skinned woman, do you want me to do it for you?" She took Kenyi's hand and methodically unwrapped the gauze from her fingers. Once, she had delicate, almost boneless hands, but after washing clothes and scrubbing floors, they had become dry and cracked from soaking in water. Now, the flesh on her hands was torn, and her middle and index fingers were swollen like carrots. She gritted her teeth, enduring the pain, meeting his gaze. "You devil, perhaps you can occupy my body, but you will never think to possess my soul. You will never think that I will play the piano for you or smile at you." His pupils suddenly constricted, breaking away from her gaze. How could she read his heart through his eyes? In an instant, he seemed a bit flustered, but he quickly regained his composure. "Play the piano? Your fingers and tendons are already shattered, I fear you will never play again." He cupped her face with one hand, the black hair on her forehead already damp with sweat. "If you want to cry, then cry as much as you want, your cries can excite me too." Her body was snow white, half of her rigid form covered by the red velvet cloth draped over the piano, and the cloth was stained with splotches of blood, even more crimson than the fabric itself. Abigail and another maid lifted her back onto the iron bed in the basement. Abigail's grey eyes trembled slightly as she softened her grip, evenly applying the ointment to Kenyi's fingers, her tone noticeably gentler. "You are really foolish. You shouldn't always provoke him. You should know that men are like this. My husband beats me every time he gets drunk, so I'd rather work. Kanye remained expressionless, and Abigail continued to apply the medicine. As she gently massaged, the cool brown ointment seeped into her flesh and joints, causing a sudden pain that felt like needles piercing her most sensitive nerves. She wanted to pull her hands back. Abigail stopped the massage, her thick, calloused palms gently holding Kanye's swollen hands, her gray eyes staring at her. The pain made tears instinctively well up in Kanye's eyes. Maybe, it hurts a bit. This ointment was bought with contributions from everyone, it's really expensive. Just this little bit costs 50 imperial marks. Abigail's words stunned Kanye for a moment, and she looked at her with tear-filled, dark eyes. You know, everyone actually enjoys listening to you play the piano. They often discuss it privately, guessing you must be a rich young lady. In these times, it's rare to have any fun. Praising. Abigail, thank you, but what you're doing to me is very cruel. Kanye interrupted her, her emotions uncontrollably agitated. Please don't give me hope anymore, I want to die. Why die? I don't believe that when people die, they still have souls. Besides, there are already enough dead people. Abigail's face was stern, but her eyes were clearly red. After saying this, she capped the ointment and turned to leave. Kanye lowered her gaze, knowing that everyone was mourning the death of the little gardener, Charles. These servants could turn a blind eye to the slaughter happening outside the mansion, but his death occurred right beside them. He was their companion and friend. Everyone has a soft spot in their hearts, but his heart did not, mirroring his cold gaze, a bottomless abyss of darkness. She even doubted whether he had a heart. The deaths of Dr. Harrison and Charles were blood debts on his conscience. Did he not fear the judgment day? The ointment was effective. 3 days later, her hands were no longer red and swollen, and the pain had lessened significantly, allowing her to curl her fingers slightly. She had been lying in bed for these days, and Abigail had not made her do any work. Occasionally, someone would come to bring her food and water. She was certain that the devil would not let her off so easily. The elegant Black Knight of Atlantis, the Führer's tailor and the bespectacled senior officer of the SS called out his nickname in unison. They prided themselves on being descendants of the lost Atlantis civilization. Indeed, he was a ghostly Black Knight, the tyrannical Lord of Lightning, mercilessly destroying all obstacles. He was madly seeking revenge on her because she had thwarted his plans. He had not possessed her in the way he had intended. Kanye's gaze fixed on the half-window ledge in the basement, where there should have been a pot of white flowers, now empty. He was too powerful, in comparison, she was so weak. But the only thing she could do was not let him have his way. She just didn't know how long her body and will could hold out. General, Mr. Miller has arrived. Lieutenant Jacob reported softly. Let him in. He stopped writing, lifted his head from the documents, and smiled at his adjutant. The small man named Miller first presented a beautifully bound book in sheepskin. His long fingers flipped through the thick volume, and his ice-blue eyes sparkled. "Miller, are these all your works? They are beautiful, like pieces of art." "Yes, General, this is an art in itself." A proud and self-satisfied expression appeared on Miller's face, smiling without a hint of flattery. He raised his head and returned a smile of appreciation. "Yes, an art that transcends all others, it has life and soul. You truly are an expert, I feel very honored to serve you. So, General Ryan, have you chosen a pattern? Also, where do you plan to have it inked? Jacob, bring in my little angel. You see, it's her." Miller looked toward the door, where the tall, thin Lieutenant Jacob was bringing in a slender girl. She had black hair and black eyes. Her figure was slim and graceful, with a beauty and delicacy that European women lacked. But what attracted him most was her skin, pure white as porcelain, delicate as fat. "She is truly beautiful," he exclaimed exaggeratedly, his expression like that of someone admiring a rare piece of art. Kanye was brought here, unsure of what he intended to do. She caught sight of the large poplar wood table in the reception room, which was covered with many steel needles that looked like medical instruments, and this strange, thin man, so gaunt, with piercing eyes that seemed to penetrate her clothes and stab directly into her flesh. He stepped closer to her, one hand pressing on her shoulder while the other measured her left chest. "Here, I want a lightning symbol," he said, then turned her body slightly and pointed at her shoulder blade. "Here, I want a family crest, the emblem of my family. Look, it's this." He pointed to a wolf's head design placed on the table. "Oh, your design is perfect." Miller clasped his hands together, genuinely admiring it. Kanye finally understood his intentions and realized what this thin, eccentric man was doing. Those steel needles were not medical instruments, they were tattooing tools. He intended to ink that wicked symbol on her body. She wanted to struggle, to resist, but the cup of warm water mixed with anesthetic that Lieutenant Jacob had made her drink had already clouded her senses, and she finally succumbed and fainted. He pierced her skin with needle after needle, continuously pressing cotton balls against the blood that oozed out. Finally done. Miller admired his work. "Very good." He stood behind this unique artist, softly praising. "Oppressive. Once the blood and swelling are released, the design will become even more vibrant, but remember, it must not get wet for the next few days." "Miller, I suddenly have an idea." He fiddled with her body, examining the two tattoos on her chest and back. His gaze gradually lowered, and his hand stroked the smooth skin of her slender ankle. "Look, here, I want to ink a name." "What a good idea, no one has done this in this position before." "What is her name?" Miller held the bloodied needle, his expression somewhat excited. He squinted his ice blue eyes. No, what I want is my name. Ruth's violet eyes stared unblinkingly at the pool of crimson blood on the floor, the echoes of the girl's screams still ringing in her ears. In her mind lingered the image of the girl, gasping for breath before fainting, pleading for her to end her life. Based on the instinctive sympathy women have for one another, she should have done it, but driven by her own instincts, she could think of nothing but escaping this place. He emerged from the bathroom, his hands washed clean of blood. He shook his arm as if to rid himself of the blood that had clung to him. He saw her anxiously putting on her dress. "What? Are you leaving?" Ruth took a deep breath, adjusting the straps of her black stockings. "Ryan, I've had enough. I don't want to be your shield anymore." He blocked her path, narrowing his icy blue eyes. "What do you mean by that? I could shoot her in the head right in front of you." "Of course you want to do that. You've thought about it countless times, but you've never acted on it." Sidestepped him, draping her fiery red fox fur scarf around her long neck. "You want her dead, you wicked woman." He lifted her chin with his finger. "Don't tell me you're jealous of her." Under the piercing gaze of his sharp, ice-blue eyes, Ruth lost the courage to utter any more lies. Her voice trembled slightly. She's just a little girl. Why do you have to be so cruel? I can see that it won't be long before she takes her own life because she can't bear it." "Suicide? Humph! Don't even think about it." The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, but his tone was chillingly cold. Ruth couldn't help but shiver. "Do you hate her that much? What has she done that is so unforgivable to make you hate her so? Even for the Countess who betrayed you, you didn't harbor such deep-seated hatred." "Deep-seated hatred?" He threw his head back and laughed a few times. No, darling, I think you misunderstand me. I'm not seeking revenge." She exhaled, her violet eyes reflecting his figure. "You are a complete madman. I could teach her the skills, but God knows what you really want. Find someone else." He sat in a chair, coldly watching the alluring woman in black rush out the door. She ran down the stairs quickly. She couldn't stay in this house for even a second longer. Kanye had lost count of how many times she had been awakened. Perhaps she thought that as long as there was a glimmer of hope for survival, she should hold on tightly. But she was too tired, both physically and mentally exhausted. Now, she just wanted to die. She had once feared death, believing it to be the best release. She discovered that using shards of glass to cut along the artery of her wrist was not as difficult as she had imagined. The pain was nothing to her. After all, it was her first attempt at self-harm, akin to the first time she had used a needle during a medical course to practice on a classmate's arm. She was grateful that she still had some medical knowledge to locate the artery in her wrist. In truth, it no longer mattered, her hand was already useless. Even if the glass severed the tendons in her wrist, it didn't matter. Crimson blood flowed from her snow-white arm, and she was still shocked by the gushing flow, like a spring. She collapsed onto the cold floor, aware that life was slowly draining from her body. She still had love. She deeply loved her family back home, her friends, and even those who had once humiliated and oppressed her but still held a shred of kindness. She felt grateful towards them. She also had hatred for not being able to kill that devil with her own hands, and hatred for her own weakness, for lacking the courage to continue fighting against him. She did not intentionally choose this snowy night to end her life. There was a small window in the bathroom for ventilation, and outside, the world was a dull gray. In her eyes, a dazzling white seemed to appear, the souls of the deceased fluttering like snowflakes in the air. Factory. Her wrist was contracting and spasming violently. Her limited medical knowledge told her it was due to excessive blood loss, but this pain did not last long. She soon fell into unconsciousness. Abigail heard something shatter in the bathroom. She saw blood seeping through the crack of the bathroom door. She covered her mouth but did not report it immediately. This middle-aged, overweight woman silently walked towards the basement, clasping her hands together, holding a silver cross against her chest, murmuring prayers for the girl's soul. It was unclear whether he had a natural sensitivity to the smell of blood or if he simply thought too much time had passed, but he was still a step too late. When he kicked open the bathroom door, she was already lying in a pool of blood. His eyes were filled with her blood, as if it would instantly stain his icy blue gaze red. No. No. His eyes were frantic. How could she die? He would not allow her to die, he had not yet orchestrated her death. He wrapped a handkerchief tightly around her bleeding wrist and scooped up her already cold body, rushing down the stairs. The hospital should have been quiet at night, but with the outbreak of war, the night was no different from day. The corridors were crowded with patients. His guards rushed ahead to clear the obstacles. He carried her directly into the attending physician's office. The middle-aged doctor on night duty appeared somewhat troubled by this unexpected visitor. She was brought in too late, there is no hope. She won't survive. He shook his head, removing the stethoscope from her chest. His profession was that of a doctor, and he was accustomed to death. He didn't need to explain much, but he knew that the officer holding this African woman had a high rank. He wasn't sure of the specifics, but not just any officer had a Mercedes and a few capable SS lieutenants as guards. I said save her. He quickly drew his gun from his waist and pressed it against the doctor's temple. Sir, please don't be agitated. The doctor forced a smile as he pressed down on the black handgun, as if accustomed to such threats. Soldiers often drew their guns in a fit of impulse. He patiently explained, Sir, you see, she was brought in too late, lost too much blood, and she already had some symptoms of anemia. A gunshot rang out, and the doctor's body fell. The office was instantly enveloped in a deathly silence, but this silence lasted only 2 seconds. His blade-like gaze swept across everyone in the ward. All the doctors and nurses seemed to be activated by the gunshot, and everything began to operate at high speed. His guards dragged the doctor's body aside, leaving a bright red stain on the floor. 2 young assistant doctors quickly replaced him, one searching for a vein on her cold arm for injection while the other prepared matching plasma. He coldly observed everything falling into order, retreating from the emergency room. His hand rested on the windowsill in the corridor, where the grey night sky held no stars, and the snow fell heavier, silently drifting down like goose feathers. He exhaled a shallow white mist into the dry, cold air, having rushed out too quickly without wearing his long black coat with red lapels. Standing 5 steps behind him, Lieutenant Jacob's keen eyes fell on his black uniform sleeve. Following that gaze, he saw his insignia soaked in bright red blood, her blood. Under the harsh white light of the corridor, the blood appeared even more vivid. He ignored the stain, turning his face away from the corridor. He knew this man had followed him for 3 years. He thought he understood him well, as he had always been a diligent subordinate and a trustworthy partner. But today, that gaze made him uncomfortable. Not only that, but Ruth, who ran the club, and his housekeeper, Abigail, were also acting unusually. He suddenly felt that they were all targeting him. He never worried about being misunderstood or targeted, on the contrary, people should fear him. Almost no one dared to call him by name in private. Everyone who heard his code name G should feel a fear that arose from the depths of their hearts, from the high-ranking officials of the empire, the remnants of the dynasty, to the generals with great military achievements, to an ordinary civil servant, a grocery store owner, performers in taverns, factory workers. He held the secrets of nearly every person in the empire in his hands, secrets that could elevate a person to greatness or destroy them in an instant. His gaze deepened, piercing into the endless grey of the night. Loss. She seemed to be dead, her body as light as if she were stepping on soft clouds. Had she transformed into a snowflake in the sky? If she were a snowflake, she would want to ride the wind back to the homeland that nurtured her. But she still had clear consciousness, she was clearly not dead. Pain radiated from her wrist. She was revived once more. She should be harsher on herself, directly severing the artery in her neck with the glass, because as long as there was a breath left, she would be saved. He tormented her repeatedly, but always left her with a breath. As long as there was a breath, she would be saved. This was hell, an endless cycle of torment. Is she awake? Not yet, General, but she has passed the critical period. Understood. Kenyi lay in bed, clearly hearing his conversation with the doctor, but she lacked the courage to open her eyes. She could distinctly hear him pacing into the ward, and her brows slightly furrowed. He did not turn on the light, watching her in the darkness. She lay quietly on the bed, and he could not see her cracked, colorless lips, nor her tightly furrowed brows and trembling eyelashes. He could only see her frail body deeply sunk into the white bedding, with blood bags and 4 drips hanging from her arms, instruments and tubes inserted into her. She was very weak, and the ward was so quiet that not even a whisper of her breath could be heard. After a long time, he finally spoke to himself, his tone filled with an arrogant disdain. "Foolish woman, do you think that suicide can end everything?" It was as if he was performing a self-written play. "Let me tell you, this will not end, it will never end." The warm, constant temperature of the room suddenly made him feel a tightness in his chest. He quickly walked to the window and forcefully pushed it open. The freezing air rushed in through the wide-open window, and the snowflakes fell poetically and gently. He extended his palm to catch a snowflake, which instantly melted in the warmth of his hand. His ice-blue eyes gazed at the droplet of crystal-clear water in his palm, like a tear, sliding down the lines of his hand. His voice became low and hoarse. "What is an end? If there is no beginning, there will never be an end. Actually, sometimes, you are quite pitiful, really. You are so weak, trembling under the whip, anyone who sees it would feel pity." Suddenly, he turned around, glaring at her from a few meters away, an invisible flame burning in his ice-blue eyes. "But you are not worthy of sympathy because all of this is your own doing. You should not look at me with your dark eyes. When I look at you, you should not avoid my gaze. You should not, when you are not looking at me, still tempt me." As he spoke, his anger escalated, turning into a somewhat hoarse growl. "So all of this is your fault, you brought it upon yourself. You shameless whore, filthy yellow-skinned woman. You are a snake, your gaze is your venom. You indiscriminately spray your poison at me." Kanye kept her eyes tightly shut, listening to his shouts and the sound of glass shattering on the floor. "You foolish woman! Vicious snake! You attempt to corrupt me. You dream of controlling me. You should never have provoked me. You will pay for your despicable actions." Tiny shards of glass splattered onto her cheek, and from a distance, she could hear his heavy breathing. "Yes, from beginning to end, you have not smiled at me, but you have made me understand what intoxication and doubt, shudder and fear, anticipation and shyness, restlessness and loneliness are. What is its essence? Is it two lonely hearts comforting each other? Is it the romance and elegance of flowers under the moonlight? Is it the restraint of a spiritual feast? Or is it the infinite radiation of human instinct? Let those filthy theories go to hell." His tone gradually lowered, as if the most tender low notes of a cello were playing. "You will never know, you will never know, it is an uncontrollable desire, its heat surpasses millions of flames. Perhaps living means having such a moment, the helplessness of not getting what you want, the daily concern, the pain of impending loss. Is all of this not wonderful? It is filled with suffering and madness. Everything exceeds reason, everything has no logic to follow." Blue eyes. The window was open, and the white curtains fluttered in the wind. The snow had stopped, and the pure white dressed the scenery outside into a dreamlike, magnificent fairy tale world. He stood in the cold, snowy light, looking like a handsome prince with golden hair and blue eyes, his ice crystal-like pupils filled with a faint sadness. Finally, his voice returned to calm. Yes, perhaps it should end. He walked out of her room, the floor littered with shattered vessels. He had broken everything within reach in that room, with one exception, her, lying quietly on the sickbed. After his storm-like rampage, she remained so still, the ward's window wide open, cold winds rushing in, the temperature in the room quickly dropping to near zero. Her tears slid down her icy cheeks, almost freezing into ice. After a long while, a nurse finally entered the room to clean up the mess. The next day, as dawn broke, Lieutenant Jacob quietly approached her bedside and said, "Miss Gianna, I have been ordered by the general to take you back to the residence." Kenyi's eyes were vacant as if she had become a soulless zombie, sitting dazed on the bed. But Jacob knew he could not delay. Without waiting for her to react, he stepped forward and picked her up in his arms, carrying her fragile, cold body to the black Mercedes sedan, closing the door securely behind her. The car drove steadily along the road. Through the window, the outside was a winter's silence, with white lining the road, sparse pedestrians, and a few similarly slow-moving vehicles. However, the car still arrived at the gate of the villa, where guards were usually strict. Lieutenant Jacob gestured for the guards to let them through. He helped her out of the car like a partridge frozen in the snow, her feet unresponsive, trembling with every step. Lieutenant Jacob supported her to the reception room on the second floor. His task was complete, but he did not leave immediately. He took one last deep look at her. She sat quietly in the chair, her skin pale, eyes dark, with blood-stained bandages wrapped around her wrists, completely motionless. "Take care of yourself." Lieutenant Jacob knew he could do nothing more than leave her with those words, which he also knew were meaningless. He turned and left the reception room. Soon, he pushed the door open again, followed by a maid carrying some clothes and boxes. The pink dress was not the same as the previous one. The hem of the earlier dress had been torn into rags to bandage his wounds. This was a complete, brand new dress. "Put it here, you can go out now," he said softly to the maid. The maid humbly retreated, her body bruised, anemic, and her gaze vacant. He gently untied the straps of her dress. He opened the velvet box and took out the diamond-studded necklace. This necklace, paired with the dress, seemed too dazzling and extravagant. After hesitating for a moment, he still placed it around her neck. He meticulously dressed her as if performing a sacred ritual, then his ice-blue eyes gazed at his work. He knelt on one knee, like a medieval knight pledging loyalty to his lady. He traced her with his long fingers, starting from her ankle, where his name was tattooed on her delicate ankle. He caressed the tattoo and moved up to her calf. His hand did not venture under her skirt. The neckline of her dress was low, revealing half of her fair chest, with his family crest, a black wolf, on her. A lightning mark was on her shoulder blade. He branded her with his mark. She was his possession, his slave, his woman. He suddenly felt his blood boiling, his heart pounding in his chest, as if it would leap out at any moment. Finally, he pressed her down onto the table. His chaotic heat met her bone-chilling cold, yet she still cooled him down. He adjusted her pink dress. "Go," he said to her. She moved her legs stiffly, like a puppet on strings, following him step by step into the woods behind the residence. Her dress was made of thin silk, and her shoes were delicate high heels, all spring styles, unsuitable for the winter after the snow, yet she felt no cold at all. "This gun has only one bullet. If it doesn't hit you," he paused slightly, something flickered in his ice-blue eyes, and he said hoarsely, "then you will be free." Depths. She lowered her eyes, not seeing the flicker in his gaze, but the word freedom finally stirred something in her vacant eyes, and her brain began to think again. Was he really giving her a chance, or was he deliberately offering her a false hope, igniting the ashes of her heart, watching her hover on the edge of life and death, struggling in pain? He raised the gun, aiming at her forehead. When he lifted the gun, there was no warmth in his ice-blue pupils. "Now, you can go." With his precise marksmanship, a single bullet was enough to end her life. Yet he still showed some mercy. He gave her a bullet, a straightforward end to her life. Kanye turned her head, taking the first step, the second step, the third step, walking deeper into the woods. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. She counted her steps, just like when she couldn't sleep at night due to pain and fear, counting numbers in lonely helplessness. Her shoes crunched in the snow as she walked deeper into the dark woods, heading towards the darkness where a scythe-wielding Grim Reaper awaited her. She walked for a long time, losing count of her steps. Perhaps it was over 100 steps, or maybe 200, 300, she couldn't remember. Suddenly, a question surged in her mind: why hadn't the gunshot sounded? Yes, the gunshot had not sounded. The surroundings were silent. She stopped in her tracks, only able to hear her own breath in the dry, cold air, and the heavy snow on the tree branches breaking off with a sound as it fell to the ground, merging with the pristine white below. Turning back suddenly, he was no longer there. Even the distant silhouette had vanished, leaving only a trail of gradually fading boot prints in the snow. Kanye stood frozen in place, first caught in a state of rigidity, from her brain to her limbs, all stiff. She could hardly believe this was real. Could he really have let her go? No, how could that be? He could not possibly let her off like this. He was a butcher, the Grim Reaper in black, and what he called an end should mean the end of a life. Her consciousness slowly began to return, and she started to feel the cold. The temperature around her must have been several degrees below zero. Her feet were numb from the cold, her hands stiff. Even her chest felt like it was freezing. But a wave of heat suddenly surged in her heart, causing her heart to contract and leap. No, it couldn't be like that, it absolutely couldn't be. Did he deliberately let her go because the little bit of conscience and humanity he had left hadn't completely vanished? Or was it, as she had heard while unconscious in the hospital, that he had a deep, complex, and subtle feeling for her? She dared not conclude that feeling was love. To her, love should be a complete devotion, a selfless giving for the happiness of the beloved. From beginning to end, his actions had nothing to do with love. He used a whip to make her submit when seduction failed, forced her to comply with a dagger, and repeatedly subjected her to violence. In his ice blue eyes, there was only strong possession and mad jealousy. He was as bloodthirsty and cruel as a wolf pack leader, as tyrannical and ruthless as the god of lightning. On the hospital bed, facing her unconscious form, he spoke of his absurd logic and unique insights on love. Even with the rigorously armed minds of these Nazis, equipped with Hegelian philosophy, everything sounded so ridiculous, so absurd. A wolf had fallen in love with its prey, tearing it apart with its fangs, using its claws to draw blood, to validate its love. But this was both absurd and strangely logical. Because of love, he approached her, and also because of love, he chose to let her go, to distance himself from her. Kanye was unwilling to continue along this line of thought. If she did, she would be driven mad. The pain he had inflicted on her was already enough. She would not allow him to impose sorrow upon her soul again. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. As she cried out loud, she ran deeper into the forest, slipping and falling several times. The branches of the bushes scratched her face, her arms, and her calves, but she paid no attention, continuing to run through the snow. Anyone with a little knowledge of guns would know that he hadn't pulled the safety catch. An unloaded gun was merely a decoration, with no real offensive power. He raised the gun at her only to declare that she should leave. He didn't look back at her. The moment she turned back, woodenly taking her first step into the depths of the forest, he had already turned and left. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.